What will the Buffalo Bills offense look like in 2024? I'm joined by Anthony Prohaska to speculate over that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, folks, welcome in. I've been teasing it all week. I'm joined right now by Anthony Prohaska of Cover One, one of my favorite people to talk football with. And anytime I got a complex scheme conversation I want to have, I usually send him a line, and he's been kind enough to answer the call. Anthony, welcome in.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for the very kind words. I appreciate being one of your go-tos for scheme conversation, and yeah, that's my wheelhouse. I was pumped when you messaged me to come on the show, and then even more so once we got into the nitty-gritty of what this episode was going to be about. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm pumped to have this conversation.
Well, let's have that conversation. And Anthony, I don't know if you've heard, Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis are no longer members of the Buffalo Bills. Khalil Shakir is the only wide receiver on the team that's actually caught a pass from Josh Allen during the regular season. Dawson Knox is your highest paid offensive skill player, and the Bills' window to compete is dead. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this Buffalo Bills offense, as it does have a new look and feel with a lot of personnel changes, with, of course, a full-time hire for Joe Brady to be the offensive coordinator. And so our objective today is to really kind of just talk about what this is going to look like. And so let's start here. Let's talk about the turnover at wide receiver, because I think it is pretty significant to note that Khalil Shakir is the only guy in this receiver core that's ever caught a pass from Josh Allen in a game. And so when you look at who's in and who's out, what's kind of your prevailing thought on what the Bills want at wide receiver? Because I don't think, let me continue the question here. Because I don't think that they just wanted to get worse, right? Like, I don't think they wanted to, you know what I mean?
You don't think that was the plan?
So why did they do this? And what does this tell you about what they want this offense to look like?
I like the way you phrase it now, but I'm envisioning the idea of them being like, we want to get worse at this position group. Right. How do we do it? I think one, even though he's not a receiver, I think it goes more towards the evidence of Dalton Kincaid is the top passing threat pass catcher in this offense. And then I think from a pure receiver room perspective, and I spoke about it on my show last week, I think it means they're betting on Joe Brady and Josh Allen. I think they are looking towards a potential shift in the wide receiver room that falls a bit into the larger league-wide trends in terms of how offenses are trying to swing the pendulum back in their favor after defenses actually did a pretty good job of taking that pendulum the past couple of years with coverage structures, nickel defenses, going back even further, well, nickel and dime defenses, and going back even further of changing interior defensive line play and having more defensive tackles that were built between 300 to 305 pounds, and everything was about penetration and getting to the quarterback. And I think offenses on the whole are starting to switch towards more run game pieces, getting a little bit heavier up front, putting a little more emphasis on the interior to people move. And then from a receiver perspective, I think bigger bodies are starting to become more in vogue. We've seen it the past couple of years with when like power slot became like a theme and a trend for teams. But I think now we're starting to see that a little bit more just with bigger bodied receivers, offenses trying to create mismatches, however, which way, shape, and form they can. And I think with getting rid of Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis and Trent Sherfield and Deontay Hardy, even though Sherfield and Hardy were auxiliary pieces and really two auxiliary pieces, but moving away from like a known quantity in Stefon Diggs and even Gabe Davis to a degree, I think it means they're betting on Joe Brady and Josh Allen. I think they're trying to take advantage of the size that they have through scheme and design and sequencing and layering, and then creating mismatches off of size, personnel, and alignment.
I think it's pretty clear that the Bills are going to share the ball. I think I kind of keep going back to that ideology where this isn't an offense that's predicated on throwing the ball to Stefon Diggs 150 times. And I'm pretty fascinated to speculate over what that looks like for Josh Allen. Does it impact where he starts his eyes? I think he's talked about that this offseason, about how some of the tweaks that Joe Brady has in his game. And he's like, yeah, one of the things is where I start my eyes, and thought to myself, why haven't I always done that? And you're a tape guy. I'm a tape guy. And I think that's something that I'm always a little surprised with Josh Allen, that it's like, man, you see the leverage of your offense. You know where the routes are going. Why are you starting here? And it seems like such a small thing, but I wonder if that's part of Diggs has got to eat, where you heard Joe Brady today talk. He goes, everyone's going to eat if you do your part, right? If you run those for the love of the game routes and you take it seriously, if you block, like, you're going to get your opportunities. How do you feel about this in terms of a Diggs-less offense, mostly through the lens of, all right, that's not 150 targets going to one guy. You're still going to have guys that are going to have a certain place on the pecking order of target distribution, but can Josh Allen be that type of facilitator, or does he need to have, all right, I need to get a bucket, I'm going to this guy?
Yeah, that's, I think, the big question for me. In a vacuum, I don't mind this type of direction for a team, offense, college, whatever. Like the idea of everybody eats and you distribute the football, and your quarterback is more of a point guard or a talisman at the spot, and he distributes and elevates everyone around him. I'm just also very much a known quantity guy, and I know a lot of people were very happy to jettison Stefon Diggs to the moon and saying that he was washed and he was terrible. I disagree with that notion. And I knew that still, even though he wasn't maybe necessarily the A1 tier guy that he was early on in his Bills career, I still knew that Stefon Diggs could get a bucket when he needed to. Allen trusted him. Their rapport, I guess maybe not off the field as much, but their rapport got that job done. There is more of that question for me now. And who does he go to? When does he go to them? And how does everything fit together? I think this is very much a grouping that, if it works, it's more of a, what is it? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts type of thing. I think you've got a lot of potential mismatches that can be created with size, some speed, some route running, all of these combinations. I really think it's on Joe Brady to design everything, layer it, scheme it up, call it correctly. And then, it's on Josh Allen to, I think this year more than ever before, he really has to play quarterback from the neck up. He's got to, generate explosives when he can with his arms and his legs, but can he win with processing and decision-making regularly, both to win games directly and or force teams out of coverage shells and change looks and make things a little different and more difficult for defenses. I know some of his poor play early on last year can be attributed to Ken Dorsey, but I think a lot of people are using Dorsey as this blanket coverall for all of Josh Allen's struggles in 2023. And that's a bit too dramatic for me. And kind of echo one of your points you made. Yeah, there were just pieces last year where his eyes were going, or his decision making, or when he wasn't pulling the trigger on things that are basic, the levels. There's a levels concept against Cincinnati that always comes to my mind, where Jermaine Pratt drives on Diggs, so Kincaid goes behind him. It's literally basic. You're reading Jermaine Pratt. If he stays, you go to Diggs. If he drives, you go to Kincaid. And he drives, and Kincaid is wide open, and he looks, and he's like, nah, and he goes somewhere else, and it's a negative play. And it's just that kind of stuff. I don't think you can afford to have that this year, given how efficient he needs to be and how much of a point guard he needs to be at the quarterback spot.
I'm glad you brought up Ken Dorsey to an extent here, because I felt like when you started talking about this year's going to be a lot more on Josh Allen to win from the neck up, I thought that was kind of the pitfall of the Ken Dorsey offense, where there were baked in answers for Josh Allen within the structure of Ken Dorsey's offense. But it was incumbent on him to read the coverage rotation correctly, know where the access is going to be, and then go there with the football. And so I feel like a quarterback like Joe Brady would be, or excuse me, like Joe Burrow would be so good for Ken Dorsey's offense. I don't think that Ken Dorsey's a lost cause as an offensive coordinator. I just kind of wondered if it was the right offense for Josh Allen, mainly because I did think that it was more on Josh Allen's processing as opposed to just playing ball. So I don't know, like, is there a part of you that gets a little bit nervous when you think to yourself, well, yeah, I think he's going to have to win from the neck up? Or are we kind of overlooking that maybe there's going to be more manufactured, schemed opportunities where Josh Allen will have to, of course, there's going to be times where he's going to have to read a progression and rip it in the right spot. But maybe there's a little bit more in terms of a schemed element to the way that this is going to look, as well as he's going to facilitate all the different layers of this offense.
100%. And I think I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that's a significant difference that I should have clarified. Like, Dorsey very much was, like, here's this side does this side does that, go out, read it, make it happen. I think with Joe Brady, you're going to get more of a schemed element, to your point, even just basic things. Like, I expect to see more condensed formations to, work their size into the run and the pass game, and even potentially help beat man coverage, especially because they don't have a ton of separators or true separators at the wide receiver spot. I expect more, little things like upticks in motion and play action, and more of an overall marrying of the run and the pass in terms of how things look pre-snap and post-snap to force defenses to have answers to questions that they don't want to have to answer or can't answer. And I do think there will be more of that schemed element baked into everything off of size, personnel, and alignment. Where I think it's on Josh is from that neck up is to read it correctly, but to take it consistently and not have those moments where, I don't want to say the sugar high Josh Allen piece, but where he goes into a mode of like, nah, let me take care of it on this one, and have those negative plays. And it could be a turnover, it could be a loss. I don't know. I don't feel holistically confident in the offense right now to know that, if it's 2nd and 17, they'll be fine. Or with the changes to the defense, even though I do believe in McDermott and Babbage to a degree, I don't want to have the offense where it's like, it's fine, we can turn it over 2 or 3 times and the defense will bail them out. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily the piece this year. So from the neck up, I think it's potentially less having to process and read everything, but more so keep everything on schedule and be the true conductor of the offense and take those explosives and those crazy Josh Allen plays when they come to you, but really kind of keep everything level, keep it on pace, keep it on key, and take what is being schemed and developed for you. Make a play again when you have to, but really not putting the offense and or defense, the team as a whole, in those negative positions, at least until we really know what and who this team is, which I think might take the first couple of months of the season, as it normally does, to kind of have everybody get into their rhythm.
All right, consider this an appetizer for what's coming up in the next segment, where Anthony and I are going to break down some thoughts on target distribution, and I want to get into the screen game a little bit, so be sure to stick with us. Folks, it's here. The NFL schedule has been released. So many high-profile games for the Buffalo Bills and all the teams in the NFL. Maybe you want to get to some of these games. Well, you got to check out Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to purchase tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They have an awesome app that is easy to navigate. They specialize in last-minute tickets, but they also have flash deals. They give you a seat view so you can see exactly what to expect when you get to the venue. And I also love this, all-in prices. So no surprise fees coming at the end of the purchase. You know the full cost of the ticket from the outset. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. My guest today is Anthony Prohaska of Cover One. Make sure you are following him on X at @pro__ant. And of course, Disguise Coverage, the Film Room, all kinds of stuff over at Cover One. So make sure you're paying attention to all the great work that Anthony and the team over there produces. Let's continue this conversation. And I want to talk about target distribution. And it's funny because there's been some comments out there, like some hyperbolic comments that I'm even guilty of, where I'm like, I don't know that the Bills are going to have 1,000-yard receiver, but maybe they have like 5 guys that have 700 yards. So that prompted me, because somebody asked me, kind of a very hypothetical question. And when I get asked a question, I got to really research it. And I researched this, and Anthony, only 6 teams in the NFL last year had 3 players to top 650 or more receiving yards. That's it, man. Like this idea that 5 guys are going to have 700 receiving yards, that's not a thing. Like it doesn't happen. So when you consider the target distribution, and Joe Brady talked today and he said all the right things about, all right, it's going to be earned, right? You show up, you do your thing, it's going to be earned. The reality is there's going to be some preferences and where Josh Allen's going to go with the football. So generally speaking, I'm not asking you to say, okay, I think Shakir's going to get 90. I think Kincaid's going to get 115. Like, how do you feel about how this target distribution is going to come together? And what are some of the key factors that are going to play into that?
I think the first key factor is Dalton Kincaid. I think, again, like I mentioned earlier, he's pass catcher, target, option, however you want to verbalize it or label it. He's number one in this offense. I think the pass game will funnel and function through him, both from a traditional tight end standpoint and with what Brady can hopefully do to maximize him, whether it's putting him in the slot or putting him at an X or a Z, moving him around a little bit and doing some creative things. I think he's the focal point. He is where the conversation starts. And then everything else, I think really, and Joe Brady said this today in his presser, really kind of comes down to just matchup and what's working this week. Like maybe Keon Coleman has a big 8, target game. And then the next couple of weeks, he only has like 2 or 3 targets total, or 2 or 3 targets each game. I think the running backs are going to be heavily involved. Even looking at last year, just from a regular season standpoint, James Cook finished the year last year with 53 targets, which was 4th on the team behind Stefon Diggs, Dalton Kincaid, and Gabe Davis. And we saw the uptick in schemability and design for the running backs with Cook and with Ty Johnson down the stretch. So I expect Cook to get a good target share. I expect Ray Davis to get some work in there, and or Ty Johnson, whoever wins that RB2 spot, and how that shakes out. But for me, it starts with Kincaid and the running backs, and then scheme to design touches for Curtis Samuel, whether it comes out of the backfield or whether it comes to stuff on reads or little screen pieces. And, hopefully we can get some screen game working, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But I think you've got a group that isn't necessarily the sexiest group of pass catchers, but they have usability and functionality that's baked into a combination of skill set, size, and frame. And it's on Brady just to push the right buttons and pull the right levers at the right times.
I kind of wonder if it's this simple to look at. Last year, over the last 13 games of the season, Dalton Kincaid led this team in receiving yards. Over the last 12 games of the season last year, Khalil Shakir led this team in receiving yards. I kind of feel like those are your go-to players, and everything else is kind of sprinkled in around them. I think Curtis Samuel's going to have a role. I do think the backs are going to have a role. Keon Coleman, I think, is going to be really interesting. He's young, man. He's only 21 years old. Like, throw out whatever you think about his skill set. He's really young.
And even young too, from a career trajectory standpoint, being just a full-time football player. Like, he's young.
100%. Right. And I think Dalton Kincaid was a more polished receiving prospect coming out. He was still kind of young to football. And you kind of saw that took a little time for it to get going. And so I think maybe there's going to be times where Keon Coleman has more opportunity, but I get a little bit hesitant, and this is not anything to do with my priors about Keon Coleman. I don't know that I feel a ton of confidence saying that he's getting 80 targets this year or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. Because I think he's got such a wide variance of who he can be as a rookie, and really in terms of his career in general. Like, if you told me that he's going to end up being a high-end wide receiver 2 or like a mid to low tier 1, I'd be like, okay. If you told me he was going to play out all 4 years of his contract with the Bills and then get 5 one-year deals in a row because teams were still being like, you know what, we can be the ones to finally tap into what Keon Coleman has.
The Laquan Treadwell plan is what you're saying?
There you go. Very fair. Nice comp. I would buy that. I think he has such a wide variance because of how raw he is, because of the lack of refinement that he has, but then also because of the traits that he has. He could be awesome. He could be in the middle. He could be out of the league in 3 years and it doesn't click. I do like his football IQ that he seemingly shows. And I think that's going to be a tremendous help. I mentioned it a couple times, and not to get too sidetracked with it, but he's so endearing and so charismatic in all these interviews and these clips. And that's what everybody focuses on. He's saying a lot of really good football things. He's talking about how he sees the game and studies it and how he reads it. And for a player who's young in age and young in his football career, to recognize that already and to have that head on his shoulders, I think is a nice piece. But yeah, I'm not going into this year thinking Keon Coleman is going to be this key cog that they really lean on. Again, I think you might have a couple games where he has some good targets, or maybe he gets a lot of the red zone work and he ends up with 5 or 6 touchdowns and he has some big catches. but I like your thought process there. I think it starts with Kincaid, and then from another receiver perspective, again, yeah, Shakir, especially with his ability and how he came on last year, and his ability to read coverage and function inside, outside. Brady talked about him today. He improved his run blocking a little bit last year, so he'll just be on the field from a snap share perspective. I do think that's where it starts, and then Keon Coleman gets work in as an auxiliary piece, or just they start him in as a run blocker, maybe get some screens. And if he can progress, cool. But I just think there's such a wide array of outcomes that could really happen for him his rookie year and his career as a whole.
I mentioned earlier that only 6 teams, there was a 6-way tie for amount of receivers or offensive players with more than 650 yards for the season last year across the NFL. The Bills were one of those teams, and they were very close to having 4, with Khalil Shakir being just right there, barely missing it. So if I had to put you on the spot right now and say that 4 Bills players in 2024 have 650 or more receiving yards, who are those 4 players?
Kincaid.
With you.
Shakir.
With you.
Man. Curtis Samuel.
Curtis Samuel. Now this is where it gets interesting. Who's the other one?
I really James Cook had 446 last year. I kind of really want to say James Cook, but that going over 650 for a running back would be a good chunk. Yeah, I'm gonna be sexy. I'm gonna say Cook.
I think he's got you could maybe talk yourself into Keon Coleman. I don't think that the target share is going to be there for any other guy.
No,
so I think
it's hard. I was literally thinking Cook. I was going through everybody. Cook. I was thinking maybe if Dawson Knox is healthy, but I was I don't know. That's a great point. That's what got me. I was I don't know if that means somebody's got to get you're looking at somebody hitting a couple games where it's 3 catches for 75 yards that propel them from a yardage perspective. Right. I don't know if the consistent target share is there to generate it.
All right. If you have thoughts on that, leave us a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Tell us who the 4 players that are going to top 650 or more for the Bills in 2024 in terms of receiving yards. All right, Anthony and I are going to talk about the screen game. I think I've teased that about 3 times already. That'll be the next thing we talk about. And then, of course, some run game dynamics, which I think are pretty fascinating. I think the arrival of Ray Davis might have a lot to do with these next 2 talking points. So be sure to stick with us. All right, Anthony, I owe it to the people to talk screens. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about
all the time,
dude. It's it's all the time. So let's do it. And I want to start by providing a number here. And these numbers come courtesy of Pro Football Focus. When Ken Dorsey was the Bills offensive coordinator last year, which was weeks 1 through 10, they ran screen plays 6.9% of Josh Allen's passing attempts. And over the course of the season, that percentage would be dead last in the NFL in terms of frequency. Under Joe Brady, so weeks 11 through the divisional round, they ran a screen 11.4% of the time. So basically, that's a big jump. It's a big jump. And if they held that pace for an entire season based on last year's numbers, that would be 11th most frequent in the NFL. What are your okay? So we already do have proof of concept that the screen game is going to be part of this. And part of me wonders if that was Joe Brady's way of doing something, right? To put his stamp on the offense. Very difficult to come in at that point in the season, especially your next game is the Jets. You have all these good defenses coming up. You can't reinvent your offense right then and there. I thought maybe that was kind of his way of doing it, and also maybe giving some opportunities for Stefon Diggs. But when you think about Joe Brady, you think about the skill sets that are present, you think about the history of the screen game with the Buffalo Bills, what does this look like in 2024?
Oh, man. I want to have so much hope, but I also refuse to get my hopes up because it just hasn't happened for this offense. A lot of it for me comes down to Josh Allen. I know, so much of it is being it'd be great if we could get a coordinator that could, help develop a screen game. And I know a lot of people usually talk about it from a running back screen game perspective, but even with tunnel screens or smoke screens and stuff, let alone the running back screens, Allen's really never looked comfortable with it from a timing and rhythm perspective, especially needing to execute a running back screen. And then his accuracy isn't always the best on smoke and tunnel screens and stuff. And when you see this team continuously not get consistency from the screen game under multiple offensive coordinators, and Allen is that constant, I always come back to maybe it's Allen, because there is a legitimate element of the timing for it and you knowing like where to sell with your eyes and then the trajectory you put on the ball, the pacing of the play in general, and then combined with defenses not really selling out because they know Allen can run. So nobody's going to see a lineman move and be like, oh, here's my chance to go get him, because they're still going to be a little hesitant. And then there's the other side too. Maybe they're not practicing him enough, or, maybe Brady can finally be the one to tap into Allen or the screen game differently. I just think they have pieces this year that really do work with it. Like Keon Coleman's a good yards after catch guy from a screen perspective. James Cook, the addition of Ray Davis, who is a really good receiver out of the backfield on screens, and even just in general, like leaking out if there's no one to protect him pass pro. Like his feel for space and timing of when to get out of the backfield by design and off script is really good. And so I would like to see an increase in screen usage. I think they have the personnel for it. I also think it's another button that could potentially become an easy button for them. And I just think they need to press every button possible this year. Again, whether it comes to formation, alignment, scheme, all these pieces, anything that they can do. And, to piggyback off your point from a overall usage rate last year, when you combine Dorsey and Brady's numbers, this is per Sports Info Solutions, they had an 8% screen rate in 2023, which ended up ranking 26th. So not ideal, depending on how you look at, the screen game, but I look for an uptick there and I hope for one.
Well, the yards per attempt in the screen game wasn't good. So it's like, I don't want to, it would be nice to get some screen production, but like if you're bad at it, then you're bad at it. Now, the question is, can you get good at it? And I kind of agree with you that it's more of a Josh Allen thing. And I think it's fair to say, yeah, we should expect Josh Allen to be able to execute these screenplays. Like, okay, figure it out, dude.
Yeah.
And part of me has always wondered, like, Josh Allen, dual threat quarterback, slow trigger, right? Like eyes in the backfield. That's going to be a thing. But the Bills, as Eric Turner's pointed out repeatedly, faced the highest percentage of man coverage in the NFL last year. Like, you would think this is a great recipe for being able to run screens. Patrick Mahomes can do it. And it's a very similar type of dynamics. And they're very effective. And I know Andy Reid, play designer, one of the best screen guys in the history of the NFL, right? So that's probably a little bit unfair, but like, I do think that this is a Josh Allen thing, and some of it is that ball placement, dude. Like, the ball comes out goofy on the screen plays.
And that was one, too, when people were, like, really raking Diggs over the coals. They were like, oh, look at him not catch these screens. I'm like, Allen's throwing these into the dirt, or he's leading Diggs into, like, the blitzing slot corner who's penetrating and is unblocked. Like, he gets it at times, and you can tell, I feel like his arm is ahead of the rest of his body on these screens, because he gets it. And he just gets it, and he's immediately trying to sling it. And the arm angle is too wonky, and the ball is like spinning sometimes. It's like he's throwing knuckleballs out there, or it's sailing, or he's dirting it. Yeah, he's been decent at it at times, like especially from like a smoke and tunnel perspective with John Brown, whose nickname ironically was Smoke. But yeah, it's just, it always comes back to he's patient zero with the screen game. And I just don't know if someone can fix him.
99% of the time, I want Josh Allen to be my quarterback. But when you're running a screenplay, give me Jake Browning. I'd rather have Jake Browning.
Dude, I was going to say, give me Nick Foles. That's
Nick Foles. Sure. Perfect. Yeah. Let's call it what it is. 17 stinks at screens. Let's talk run game. Now that we're 28 minutes into this conversation, that's part of the offense too. And in fact, it was a high percentage of the offense when Joe Brady took over. I wonder how much of that was the Dallas game and the run pass skew there, but you still had a pretty big sample size of Joe Brady, right? And it was a big part of what they were able to do. And so we have James Cook returning. You have Ty Johnson back. Ray Davis is kind of the new piece here. I think the offensive line decisions are fascinating. Mitch Morse is out. Connor McGovern to center. David Edwards to the left guard spot. I thought this team was at its best last year when they were running gap runs. And then what was really interesting is it felt like late in the season, they kind of tried to get the zone game going, and it actually worked against Pittsburgh in the playoff game. But Ray Davis is to me the X factor here, where look at his career. He's a gap runner through and through. I thought his worst tape was when he was running zone. And so to me, this is like the personnel choices with the offensive line and the arrival of Ray Davis says to me gap. What are your thoughts on this run game?
I completely agree. And overall last year, the Bills had a 46% gap run rate in 2023, which ranked third in the league. If you take just the Joe Brady week, so from 11 through the end of the regular season, it was a 47% rate, which was still third. And yeah, I really think when I think of the run game really clicking last year, they were running duo, which is classified as a gap run. So they're running duo. They're running that tackle wrap that dart play where they're pulling Dawkins and they're pulling Brown. And then, yeah, they'd work in some mid zone or some weak side zone or specifically weak side mid. I think back to the one that clicks for me is against the Chargers, where they're just sending Sherfield in motion and they're going weak side zone, like literally like just weak side zone to the left, weak side zone to the right, just back and forth and swinging it. But for the majority of the year, when they needed a big run, it was a gap scheme run. And James Cook ended up with the second most gap scheme runs in 2023. And then to your point with Ray Davis, his last year at Kentucky, 127 gap runs versus 67. He showed, or 67 for zone, and he showed an affinity on those gap scheme runs. And I don't think those go away. I don't think zone runs go away either. I think you're going to continue to see somewhere near 50-50 split going to continue for the Bills when it comes to zone versus gap runs. And again, this is one where I think it makes sense given the landscape and starting the, that changing nature against NFL defenses who started to wanted to stop the McVay offenses and the Shanahan offense who were running wide zone. And so everything was about stopping runs to the perimeter. But as things have progressed and defenses got better at that, and then you pair that with, you pair that scheme of trying to stop, wide zone, you pair that with nickel defenses or dime and too high coverage structures, it just makes sense to run at defenses. And so that could be inside zone technically, but, I just expect more of those gap runs. I expect them to lean on duo and tackle wrap. And it pairs really well, again, with their bigger bodied wide receivers, pairs well with condensed formations where, you have more guys near the line of scrimmage. You can add gaps, and teams with bigger bodied wide receivers like the Rams and Lions, for example, teams that were both in the top 6 for EPA per attempt with their running back carries last year that had bigger bodied wide receivers that are a threat to get on the perimeter and or dig out a second level defender or a safety. You can use them in a variety of ways. I think the Bills fall into that. I look for the Bills to do a lot of what Sean McVay leaned into last year with their run game. And I expect a lot of gap and a lot of downhill at you type of stuff.
Weird, a Cromer on both of those coaching staffs when it comes to the fronts there. I'm going to ask you one more question, and I apologize, but I also don't apologize because I'm going to do it anyways. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but it was inspired through our conversation. One of the questions, or one of the things that I've speculated a lot on this offseason is how good is James Cook? Obviously a very productive season. He had a lot of opportunity and really interesting to see how the Bills ramped up that opportunity based on the amount of volume he had at Georgia, what he had as a rookie. And then, he was like 7th in the NFL in touches from scrimmage last year, which was very surprising to me based on how they handled Devin Singletary and kind of split the backfield work up until this point. I mean, James Cook was as much of a bell cow as we've seen in Buffalo in a very, very long time. And when you look at his metrics in terms of yards before contact, very, very high, yards after contact, very, very low. Now that doesn't account for the job that the running back could do in terms of using his vision and creativity to not get touched, right? Like that doesn't really factor that in. How good is he, man? Like the Bills are going to be in an interesting spot. Like if he has another productive season like he just did, and this is a young player, he's 24 years old. Like now we got to get into the conversation about paying running backs, and God, I already dread that. Just like right now, like what's the pulse check for you on how good is James Cook? And like, does he have a complete enough skill set? Will he ever be a good pass protector? Will he ever be a consistent short yardage back? Like, is there enough here for you to feel like, yeah, okay, continue where you're going, and I think you're a do everything enough player for us to warrant paying you like you're a top running back?
Man, that's literally been a question that's been in my head for a bunch of this offseason. And it really started with the offensive line because one of the things that I was really confident in hanging my hat on for this Bills team this offseason was, man, they finally got a really good offensive line that could pass protect, and they could run the ball. They could do zone. They could do gap. Like, then they're all coming back next year. It's going to be great. And then the Red Wedding Wednesday happened and everything changed. And even though it's not wholesale changes, it's just, McGovern to center and Edwards to guard. But you mentioned the yards before contact, and that was part of it last year. Like the Bills had one of the best run games last year, and part of that is due to James Cook and what he was able to do. But that offensive line was just creating displacement vertically, horizontally, seemingly with regularity. Like they did a good job creating space for Cook. And even too, Latavius Murray had a really successful, like from an advanced metric standpoint last year with the Bills. Ty Johnson had a good year as well from an advanced metric standpoint when you factor in like the carries that he had. So I don't want to take anything away from Cook completely, because I do think he is a good back. I do think he's got true versatility as a runner and as a pass catcher, and he improved already coming out of Georgia, like his pacing and how he sets up his gap runs. He was so urgent at Georgia where like he would get the ball. He's like, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. And now he paces it a little bit. He sets up that track and then he hits and he goes. But he would really, for me to give him a second contract, he's going to have to shore things up so much as a pass protector, which is what worries me, because he scans well and he reads well, but because of his size, he's just more often than not the nail than he is the hammer. And maybe if he goes lower a little bit more and tries to, cut dudes and take them out at the thighs and knees and flip, which he did a little bit last year, like he showed improvement in year 2 from year 1 as a pass protector. If he can make another jump, I'll entertain the conversation. It's just really hard for me to give a running back a second contract. Like, it's so worrisome, but he is a good dude. And I do think he's going to be an important point of this offense. Like overall, in terms of touches, running the ball and receiving, I think he's just going to be second. He's going to be in that conversation with Dalton Kincaid in terms of the dudes that are going to move the needle the most, along with Josh Allen. Like this offense will go as Allen, Kincaid, and James Cook go from a touches perspective.
Paying James Cook is a future problem. But one thing I do want to highlight with James Cook, I feel like the big conversation with him from a lot of Bills fans right now is drops. And of course, those late season drops, they were egregious. They were touchdowns. They're very, very frustrating. Simultaneously, I cannot believe that that's the conversation we're having about James Cook, because that's his thing, is catching the football, right? So like, I have a level of confidence that that's going to go away unless he just, you worry about the yips and like confidence and that type of thing. Like that's definitely a thing. But yeah, I never once in every season of watching James Cook for the previous 5 years thought to myself that James Cook was going to be a consistent dropper of the football.
No. And that was when they took him out of Georgia, I was so happy because I was like, man, this is a true like guy who can run the ball, but he's a true threat out of the backfield as a pass catcher. And I even looked it up. His career drop rate at Georgia in college was 1.5%. And his highest season, he had a 5.9 drop rate in 2020. And that's because he dropped one pass. So it's just reflective of like the total targets. Like he hasn't had this issue. And I think what also makes it worse for last year, granted, there was some volume to it. It was the moments that it came in, right? The drop against Philly, the drop against Dallas, even though the Bills ran away with that game against Dallas. It was these moments where it was like, his drop wasn't like, oh, he dropped it on first down. No, he dropped it for like a touchdown, or he dropped it on a third down. Like that would have moved the needle. It's these big, leverage changing moments.
I'm old enough to remember the catch against Green Bay on Sunday Night Football. How about the touchdown catch against Miami right before the half? The guy can catch the football. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it was such a weird, like spiraling situation. I got a feeling that's going to get tightened up. Anthony, this conversation was everything that I hoped it would be. I certainly hope that the listeners enjoyed it as well. I have a feeling we'll be bugging each other to talk more about the Buffalo Bills. So make sure you are paying attention to Anthony and his work on X at @pro__Ant. Cover One, Disguise Coverage, the Film Room. Make sure you're checking all of that out. And thanks again, buddy. Appreciate you being here.
I appreciate you having me. I value you and this show tremendously. And so it's always an honor every time you have me back here, and especially for these schematic conversations that I really enjoy. And I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.